In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, host Zoe Ether is back in the hot seat. In celebration of this being episode 100, Zoe and I sat down for a chat where she answers questions from you, the audience of the Smart Community Podcast. And it's fitting that when this episode goes to air, as well as being episode 100, it's also exactly 1 year since Zoe started her own smart community consultancy called ZemCon. It's been a whirlwind time, and Zoe is currently on her round-the-world smart mobility investigation via her Churchill Fellowship. In this episode, Zoe shares her thoughts and experiences in response to questions some of you in the community have asked. But if you want her up-to-date news of the Churchill Fellowship trip, head on over to pozible.com and search My Smart Community, hit support, so that you can get access to the exclusive podcast all about her Churchill Fellowship journey. In the meantime, enjoy this Ask Zoe Anything episode. And as always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hi, Zoe, and welcome back to your podcast.
Hi, Ellen. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Today, for the 100th episode of the Smart Community Podcast, we are going to...
Wow.
I know, it is amazing. Congratulations.
Yay.
Very, very cool. We are going to answer, or you are going to answer, some questions that some of your followers have sent in because they're curious and because we asked them what they wanted to know about you in this Ask Me Anything episode. And so we're going to answer some of those questions today. Is there anything you wanted to say before we get started?
I guess so. Thanks so much to my smart community for tuning in and continuing to tune in. This time, episode 1 and episode 100, I couldn't have imagined how different they would be, I guess. But also the things that I've learnt along the way, the things I've been able to share, the connections I've been able to make has been absolutely amazing. And I hope that I can answer some of your questions today. And I've had to think about them long and hard to make sure that I give you the best answers because I think about this stuff all the time, right? But when you have to actually sit and, articulate it in a way that makes sense, it is a bit more challenging. And being on the other side of the mic, it's a different experience, but I'm enjoying it.
Well, good. That's good. And just before we get started, I will say also that this is not every single question we have ever received. We obviously do have a limited time. Otherwise, this could be a 10-hour podcast episode. But it won't be the last time that you hear from Zoe in the hot seat. So today we're just going to answer just a selection of questions that Zoe has had come through from the audience. So if we've missed your questions, we're sorry. But send Zoe an email and you might feature in the next episode where we answer questions from community.
Yes, and I've tried to keep my answers brief because we have kind of jammed a lot of questions in here still. But if there's anything, once we finish, anything deeper or whatever, hit me up on the socials. You know where I'm at.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first question, Zoe, and we actually had this question from multiple people, including Georgia Ether, Rachel Smith, and Kylie Nixon. They have asked you what it's like being a podcaster and what is your favorite thing about podcasting when compared to other jobs that you might have had in the past?
It's fun, super fun. I think I've always been a performer and I didn't really realize how much I missed that part of, I guess, life and work until I wasn't doing it anymore. And it's really a creative kind of art form, if you will, which is very different to what I've done in the past, which is very, traditional engineering type roles. So at school, I did the maths and the science subjects, but I also was in the school play, the choir, the debating team. I was a school leader, so I did lots of public speaking and performing, I guess. So it's kind of like pulling all those things together, pulling all those things that I enjoy, which, talking to people, technology, smart communities, creativity, all into one. And I didn't realize that until I started thinking about what, was my favorite part of being a podcaster. And I think that's really it. And Now, it's not always easy to show up every day and record. And, you know, I'm very interested in everyone that I interview, but so you have to give people the respect and, you know, you don't want to show up and, you know, I'm tired today, so I'm just going to give a half-assed job or whatever. So showing up every day is really important. And there is still like drudgery, you know, like particularly some days when I've had to do, say, 5 interviews in one day to kind of get a few in the backlog. Or when I have really late nights or really early ones to fit in with different time zones, it can sometimes be a bit challenging. And then, you know, to just be on all the time when talking to people. But those days are kind of far and few between now, particularly we've worked out our systems better and who we're interviewing and people reaching out to me rather than me having to do all the outreach and stuff as well, and getting more people on the team.
Yeah.
Obviously has been really useful. So like less admin. So that's really helped a lot. But it should be noted that I have another job. This doesn't pay my mortgage.
Yes.
So it's not all, you know, high flying, rolling cash, like, oh, look at me, I'm a podcaster.
Not at all.
Yeah. Like, to be honest, like, I've only just started now to actually monetize in inverted commas because it's not going to pay me, and it will go directly to my team, which we said is growing, to create, produce and distribute the podcast. As you would say, Ellen, podcasts are free to listen to, but they're not free to make. So one day it would be nice to only do podcasting, although I really love getting my hands dirty in actual smart community projects and kind of I have a really nice balance between, which I'll talk about a bit later, that startup world and the consulting world. And it's not really why I started it. I didn't start it for it to make money per se. It was to really activate this smart community that I knew was out there. It just needed some connections and connecting people together and a bit of a platform, I suppose. And so it's really rewarding. And so what I like most about it is it really brings all those things that I love together. And it's so rewarding. And to start something and now see it grow and change, yeah, I couldn't really ask for much more than that.
Yeah, it's been a fun year, I have to say, and I'm really looking forward to the next 100 episodes. Can't wait to see where we are in another 12 months' time.
Yeah, me too. So I guess, okay, that's what I like about being a podcaster. My favourite part, though, is actually that I have real conversations with amazing people from all around the world. And in an independent way. That's why the monetizing part of it is a bit challenging for me at times, just to get my head around remaining independent, but still, you know, realizing that it's okay to make money from something that's currently an expense for me, but I love doing it. So I'll continue to produce it for my smart community. But yeah, I get to have these amazing conversations that I wouldn't necessarily have access to in, you know, normal circumstances. And I get like really in-depth conversations as well. And I can build relationships and I can learn alongside my smart community. And it's a way that I can totally be me as well, which is like authentically me, because it's mine and I made it, but I made it for my smart community. So yeah, I can really be me, and I've never really had that full autonomy before. So that's pretty special. And it's
creative control.
Yeah, and that's what's very different to the jobs I've had in the past, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Because when you're in a job, you're doing the job for somebody else or to please the client or, you know, as per the brief, not necessarily just because this is the way you want to do it because it's your thing and you get to make it up as you go along.
Yeah. And it's not to say that it's easy in a way, like still challenging to make sure that, you know, what I'm doing is remaining relevant to the conversation and being useful and not just like, you know, spitting content into the ether, because that's not useful either. So it's about being deliberate. I think, you know, I talked about this in the video that I put out on our birthday, our first birthday. Being deliberate is so much more important than being consistent. Being deliberate gets you the real engagement, the real impact, the actual relationships. But being consistent, you know, gets you the likes and the followers and all that kind of stuff. But
the vanity metrics.
Yeah, and and not to say that they're not important, but they're not the most important. The most important is being deliberate, which is that engagement.
Yeah, definitely. And the community that's been built is really amazing and I'm really thrilled to be a part of it. So well done, Zoe.
Thanks. I'm also glad to be a part of it, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's not like me and the community, it's the community that I'm a part of. So yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah, it is. And on that sort of note, in terms of engaging people, We've got a question here from Nathaniel Mason, which is about, he has asked a couple of questions, so we'll get to the other ones in a sec. But so Nathaniel's asked, how do we effectively engage the people that are ready to hear the message? And, on the flip side, how do we generate interest with those people who they're either not sure about the message or they're not even aware yet of this smart communities conversation?
So thanks, Nathaniel, for that. Those questions. That was just one of three.
Yeah.
We'll let you have three. Nathaniel was actually our first patron, so thanks, Nathaniel. Your support has been absolutely amazing, so thank you. And just while we're on that note, very briefly, we're moving from Patreon to Pozible mainly for the Aussies out there, because it's all in Australian dollars and a bit easier to kind of navigate. So thanks, Nathaniel, for being a patron, and hope to see you over in our SmartCom Posse. Back to your question, which was, how do we effectively engage with people who are ready to hear the message? I'll start with that one. When people are ready, I think things just like this podcast, without, doing a shameless plug, but things like this, you could do your own thing, right? You could use this as a platform to talk to the people and make those connections. But what I've found is just start by talking to people that as soon, like if they spark interest or what's the word, share a common interest, I guess, when you're talking to people at networking events and all that kind of fun stuff. But the biggest thing I think is if people are ready to have the conversation, it's going to be a much easier conversation, and you can actually have kind of real deep conversation, and you can debate some things because it's not all one way. And don't be afraid to go old school as well, because I think just having a coffee with somebody to have a bit of a chat about what it means and what it doesn't mean. And then there will be a lot of different channels that people will be engaging with. So, for example, the podcast is one of those, but LinkedIn is another one. That's where I find a lot of my connections and get to have really great conversations with people. And then there's a whole bunch of different platforms and industry groups. So, Australian Smart Community Association, you've got things like Smart Cities Council, you've got the International Be Smart City. And again, being deliberate is key. So spending time doing this, it's really not a quick fix. It's a kind of a slow burn. So joining these groups and getting actively involved in these groups, but realizing that we only have a certain amount of time in our day to do these things. So you can't do everything. And I think that's where starting those conversations and not being afraid to, move on from, you might think you have a common interest in it or open. I think common's not the right word, but like people with open minds, that's who you want to be talking to. So I think we do need this platform. There's, a few different things. And I guess that's why we started the podcast. But where smart communities, so such as, say local government, for example, can share in a real way. So I think starting conversation is one thing, but then how do you have those meaningful discussions about what worked and what didn't work and why you think it didn't work, and making sure that blame isn't kind of pushed out there. The first place to start is internally. So within your business, within your group, within your community, are you doing things in a smart community kind of way? Are you already collaborating across, different disciplines? So there's a few things that we can do to look internally first and kind of look at those gaps, look at those, those crossovers that we don't even realize exist within our own organizations. And also community groups, like doesn't necessarily have to be a business, but is your community group trying to achieve the same thing as someone else's community group? And maybe you can join forces, or maybe, you're doing that function and they're doing that other function. And I've been amazed at how open people are and sharing the ideas and project learnings and, really keen to collaborate. So I guess, don't be afraid to reach out and ask. And the worst thing people can say is no. I'm one to reach out to CEOs and ask for a coffee.
And you get the coffee. I mean, that's the point, right? Often people think that they shouldn't reach out, or they don't reach out because they're afraid of that rejection, or that they think they don't want to be seen to be bothering somebody. But actually, when you ask, you often get. And if you don't ask, you won't.
And I think it's about adding value. So not going in there with a mindset of, what can I get out of this conversation? It's actually, what can I add? What value can I add? And it may just be having a conversation and you've built a relationship, which on both sides. So on that note, like, I think there's a big space for an online platform to share and engage. And I think it's both public and private and community groups. And I mean, Be Smart City have started this. They're not paying me, by the way. This is not a not a paid ad. But I do think that they've started this, and I'm excited to kind of get more involved. And we need to get Australia on the map. And, you know, whether it's Be Smart City or whether, you know, it's somewhere else, but that's kind of where I see this real opportunity. But people have to engage and actively participate. And that only comes from buy-in. So when people are ready to hear that conversation, that message, I suppose. And also that the message is not the same for everyone. I think that's a big deal. And well, that's partly why I changed to Smart Community, as we've already discussed, is because I wanted people to be involved in the conversation, not technology, as in, like, you don't come at it with, oh, what technology can I sell into this smart city? But what are the outcomes for people that we can use, that we can get through smart community thinking? So I think ready to hear the message, it's nothing too flash. It's online platform, building those relationships. And then it's the old school, having coffee with people and connecting with them on a personal or a human level, I guess.
Yeah. Nathaniel had another question, which was, how do we better support each other nationally to accelerate outcomes through shared learning and mitigating known challenges or risks or pitfalls?
Yeah, so I think that's kind of what we're talking about already, which is that online platform to share and engage. But I do think that that stuff needs to start internally. So we can go and meet with Barcelona and Palo Alto and, you know, Ipswich City Council or whatever. We can get all their learnings, which is great because we can learn a lot from them. But if we don't look internally first about how we're going to use those, what are people inside the organisation thinking about smart city or smart community? Do they even know what it means? Do they care about it? Are they going to buy in when we're trying to actively share and engage? And the only way you do that from a business perspective is make time for it, right? And time is money. So thinking about the best use of people's time and resources. Because I think that what we can't do is just take all the learnings from, you know, internationally, nationally, whatever, and then try and jam them into an organisation that isn't ready to hear the message. So priming them with the message, and not in a forceful way, but in a speaking on the same language, speaking the language that people need to hear about what will it do for them individually as a community member or a person that works for an organisation. And then what will it do for the wider community, the overall, like how can we, rather than looking at what specific technologies we can utilise, what are the outcomes that they could actually deliver? So I think nationally we could definitely support. I think we're getting there. Like, there are so many really supportive and collaborative groups out there that we can be a part of. But there is some improvements that will continue to be made about how we can share and engage across those different disciplines and organisations. And I think the national approach or the regional approach is so important. And I'm really excited to see regions getting together and actually having these smart community conversations and then sharing that with their own regions. So looking at those common priorities and pain points and, you know, the actions that they want to do and how they can leverage, you know, so they can multiply the benefits across the whole region. And then we can do that region to region as well. It's kind of a parallel process, right? We want to find out what people are doing, at the same time prepare ourselves internally within an organisation to take on some of those learnings and really benefit from those.
And one more question from Nathaniel. He says, how do we deploy smart emerging technologies that achieve community benefit and are also cost neutral by achieving measurable efficiency and or measurable income?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think it starts with having a vision. And I don't mean you have to go out and get a smart city or smart community strategy written, although that's also a good thing to be doing. But it starts with the smart community vision. So that includes the people in the community as well. So that's that, bringing the people along the journey. And I think engaging with the community is paramount. However, engaging in the right way in a smart way is the key. So I don't just mean technology, but what I do mean is having a number of different channels that people can choose from to engage. And it shouldn't be, a tick and flick. It needs to be rich and deep and actually be at the right time. That's the biggest thing. So I think improving boring government processes, which I love to do, so let me know if you need help with that. You probably don't need to have a lot of involvement with the community straight away, and that's okay. And I think over-engagement can also be a real issue, like engagement fatigue. Like why are you asking me about, like, that I don't want potholes in my street? Like, you don't have to ask me that.
Yeah.
But something that actually is going to impact someone's life in a change the way that they're going to do things, whether we think that's positive or negative, they might have a completely different opinion on that. So there's different tools that need to be used. And it's, you need people that are practiced in this, like experienced community engagement personnel that, have the experience, but then are also open and using these new tools that are available. So I had lots of people on the podcast talk about this. And so a couple were Brian Ashton and Amelia Loy. So go back and have a listen to their episodes. And who else did I have? I had Neil Glentworth talking about the regional approach. I've had lots of people. So I think there's different ways to do it and there's different tools in our toolbox, but we still need to have the toolbox and then we pick out what we need to use. So I'm also hoping that it's not cost neutral, but actually cost positive. And maybe that's not in dollars, which hopefully there will be some of, depending on what it actually is, but in savings, in time, resources, increases in economic prosperity, happiness, wellness, these type of things. I'm hoping that it's not just a cost neutral
exercise.
Yeah, cost neutral exercise. Some things may cost you more, but in the long run, it will, be less because of all these other things that we're talking about. And that's not easy. That's a very complex web that we're talking about here. And so it's really not and not that Nathaniel's saying this is, but some of the quick wins, okay, that might be good to get some rungs on the board and, get some ribbons cut and some, buy-in from the community, which, I think are all things that are valuable in the world that we live in currently. We need to show that we're making improvements, even if they're quick wins or low-hanging fruit, whatever you want to call them these days. Well, no regrets, #no regrets. But then there's the long term. So even if it costs you something in the short term, actually panning out and looking at those long-term economic benefits and prosperity benefits and happiness and wellness and productivity increases, and not just productivity in, we get more work done, but can we buy back some of that leisure time so people aren't so stressed out but still can have the same level of income, etc. And I think future-proofing is one of those really, it's a bit of a buzzword at the moment as well, but even if you don't do anything different, but making sure we're thinking about that. And if someone does bring up something that's like, oh, hey, what about when this technology changes? Thinking about that, documenting that, and risk assessing that is really important. And making, we need more forward thinkers that putting basic examples of, putting conduit in the ground for the future, fiber network or whatever. But there's lots of different things depending on what you're doing in that space that will future-proof, but it won't necessarily mean you won't have to change it. It's more adaptive. How is adaptive infrastructure, how is the infrastructure going to adapt to the new things that are coming, which sometimes we will not know what those are and we couldn't possibly have predicted them. But it's just taking a bit of time to think about those things and the full life cycle of the thing, the infrastructure, the piece of technology, both from a where did it come from perspective and where is it going? And then when it finishes its life, where will it go? What will it look like? So looking at that circular aspect as well. And then briefly, monitoring as well, which is part of Nathaniel's question, is so important because we haven't typically done this very well in the past because either we didn't want to know, we didn't know why we wanted to know or why we didn't want to know. We didn't know how to do it. The technology was too expensive, etc., etc. We can do this now, but the only way you can do this properly is by actually having a baseline. So before you do a project, having a baseline data of what it was like before and then what are the things we're trying to achieve, and then being able to compare those across different areas or criteria that we're hoping to measure against. And some of these will be quality and some of them will be quantity and some, tangible and non-tangible, but how can you have indicators for all of those different aspects?
Good questions, Nathaniel, and thank you for sharing them with us. And the next question comes from Rachel Smith, who actually was in episode 62. She's a previous podcast guest, and Rachel would like to know what is the first thing each community could do to be a smart community?
Well, let's start with the local council. First thing that each, say, local council, because they're there for the community, should do is take stock of where they're at and work out what they want to be different. So we all know things don't actually stop. So you'll be doing this in parallel to other things that are happening, but working out what the gaps are, what the pain points are, and what could we be doing differently. So that takes a bit of time just to stop and think about things. But we all know, life takes place when you're making plans. I think that's the right quote.
Yeah.
So realizing that things will just keep going the way it's going. But once we know those gaps and pain points, then we can interject and we can flip or move the dial, even if it's 1 or 2 degrees, and we can end up in a completely different area. But without knowing what the gaps are and what the pain points are that we are trying to solve, we can't really do that. There'll be different people involved now. So what could we ask someone, or who could we ask that's different to be involved in solving this problem? If it's a problem that we've tried to solve many times over and over, but we still have the same issue, it's not that we've failed. We've just learnt a whole bunch of stuff. But maybe we need to bring someone else in, ask them how they think we should do it. And I don't just mean, members of the community. That's also important, but different professionals that we never thought that we would have to engage with before. And are we missing some of those skill sets? What's the data that's coming in and out? So I think taking stock is really important. And I think that, I can't remember where I heard this term, but the term middle out. So it's not purely top down and it's not purely bottom up. So it's not purely government making regulation and that trickling down, and then that's how you make smart communities. And it's not purely people on the ground, grassrootsy things happening. Both of those things are important. And it's actually getting the best of both worlds. So that middle out approach and thinking, I suppose, it's a different way to think about it, that it's not one versus the other. It's actually both that we need. So we need the government, the politicians, the leaders to be involved. We need buy-in. And we also need the people in the community to feel empowered that they can lead, these things and they can create these things. And I think local government and community groups really bring that together in the middle, bring those approaches together. And they can't do that by themselves. They just have a lot of, they're just in I think, a good position to be part of or leaders in the conversation. But we do also need the state government, so then we can cross-pollinate across the regions as well as the states, as well as that national approach that we were talking about earlier. So then we can share information. If the state government comes on board to do that piece, so then it's not just favouring one area or the other depending on where it's located. So really having that layer in the middle. And maybe that's not state government, maybe that's a private entity working with the councils and government, and that'll look different. But that middle out approach, I think, is really important.
Cool. So yeah, that first thing is just take stock of what the community needs. You can't become a smart community if you're actually not listening to the community and what they need, but then making decisions perhaps from a middle out approach rather than any other way.
Yeah. Yep.
Great question, Rachel. Thank you. And by the way, we will put the links to, because you've obviously mentioned a couple of previous podcast episodes already, and then we've got a couple of questions from some previous podcast guests. We'll pop the links to all of those in the show notes as well, so you can go back and catch up on those episodes if you've missed them, or re-listen if it's been a while and you want to jog your memory about what those excellent guests had to say. Our next question comes from Joy Taylor, who is a friend of ours here in Toowoomba. And Joy says, we know that jobs as we currently know them are less and less likely to exist in the future, much in part to the changes in the development of technologies such as those that are associated with smart communities. What do you believe are the essential skills that all kids need to be learning now so that they're as best positioned as they can be to be ready and able to move forward into the roles that will be needed to live in, manage and improve our cities, homes and communities for the foreseeable future?
Two things: connection and emotional intelligence. When I say connection, I mean human connection, as well as being able to use the connectivity. So this is going to look very different to even when you and I were young, Ellen. It's going to be more and more digital. So that's why that human connection piece is so important. It's about being able to actually switch off and let go of the digital for a while so we can be physically with people in our community. I don't think it's as dire straits as, say, people are making it out to be, but learning those different techniques of self-care and how we connect with our community and doing things in a way that's not, just about ourselves. And I think that's where the emotional intelligence piece come in, because we'll need more and more of that as we move into a more automated world. So there's a famous quote that 85% of your financial success is due to skills in human engineering. So that's your personality, your ability to communicate, negotiate, and lead. And only 15% is due to your technical knowledge. It's not to say that technical knowledge is not important, but I think that I wanted to flip this question around, which is, what do you think we as adults need to keep up with the young people?
True, because they're digital natives.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I sort of are as well, but really the next generation even more digital natives. So then they're going to pick up that whatever the new technology is or whatever the next lot of skills are in the technical realm, that's going to come more easily to them.
Yeah.
But yeah, the human skills are never going to go out of style.
Yeah, and they're going to become even more important, because when things are automated, if something if something goes wrong, for example, so Michael Leggett talked about this in his episode about resilience, that the key to resilience is human. So we can automate as much as we want, but there's still unknown factors. There's still many variables that change the way we do things. Think about autonomous vehicles. Okay, yeah, at the moment they can cruise around in very restricted environments to reduce the variables. So if we didn't have those variables, then we could all be in our autonomous vehicles. But we know that's not the way it is, because there's kangaroos bouncing around. There's people doing U-turns in front of you. There's people not, doing very bizarre things on the road, and we can't work out why. There's people stepping out in front of cars, that type of thing. So there's variables. And so we need the human engineering, which is like, how can we, there's one side, which is like, when things do go wrong, being able to pick up where the technology is left off and make our, communities resilient. And then the other thing, we're being able to connect with other human beings. So then we don't, lose that ability to be human and kind and good people as well. And I think there's a few things. The way I thought about this question also was like things that I wish that I had learnt when I was a kid for what I'm trying to do now, which is skills in business, practical skills, and yes, technical skills as well. But mixing those technical skills with the arts, the maths can be creative, like, those type of things, those cross-disciplinary skills are what is going to make our community smart. Because if we just have, say, coders sitting in a room together without any of that creative flair or whatever, then...
Well, broader life experience.
Yeah, we need to bring those really... And I think people of all different backgrounds, as long as they can access the education that they want and need, that's really important. So yes, we're going to need more people in data science, and coding and those really deep technical skills. But I think it's the permission to do those is important. So, whatever background you came from, if you can access that, you'll be drawn towards the things that you're good at or the things that you like. So having that choice. So choice is really important. And then after that is then being able to connect on a human level with other people that are doing different things to you. So being able to connect engineers with planners, being able to talk the same smart community language, retail with app developers or whatever, and actually being able to have respectful, high trust conversations, because we can talk that same language because we can still connect on a human level. It's not just, oh, well, I'm very smart, so you should just listen to me, because we know that doesn't work, right?
Yeah. I have an answer to this. Is that all right? Am I allowed to respond?
I love that, because when I was answering this, I thought that you would have some ideas.
Yeah, well, because obviously my background is in education. So I'm really, I really care a lot about what skills and knowledge we are handing over and encouraging our next generation to be learning now. And I actually think the number one skill is learning how to learn. And I think it's such an overlooked one because, yes, of course, we need to be getting our kids the basics, reading, writing, arithmetic, and all the rest. And skills like coding are going to be so much more important in the future than they have been up until now. But actually, I think that our current education system kind of somehow sets people up for this idea that once they finish school, they'll know everything they need to know. Or that's certainly a conversation I've had a lot, is people say, I wish I learned this in school, and now I'm 45 and I have to learn it. And I'm like, yeah, but it didn't exist when you were in school. Like, learning doesn't stop when you finish school. So actually, if we can instill in our kids a growth mindset, for one, which if you don't know about the work of Carol Dweck about growth and fixed mindsets, go and look that up because it's really important. But if we can instill in our kids a growth mindset so that they are prepared to grow and to continue to grow and to continue to try and take risks and make mistakes and learn from them. And then to learn how to learn and to learn how to go and find information for themselves and to evaluate the sources of the information that they're getting and to know themselves and how they learn best and be able to either seek out the mentoring or the guidance or the teaching that they need when they know that they need it and when they know that they're ready for it, or to teach it to themselves. I think that's the key because, as you said before about like some of the technologies that are going to come through, that's the future-proofing part to me. Future-proofing our kids is to teach them how to learn, not how to learn a specific thing, but how they can actually learn anything that they want to or need to learn, because we don't know what they're going to need to know in the future. But if they have a growth mindset and they have that understanding of themselves and they know how to learn, then they'll be fine.
I think you're so right, the lifelong learning aspect. And it's actually a skill, right? It's a skill to learn, to know how to learn or to work out how to learn and learn on your own as well. And what I've found is learning these business skills and that kind of thing, working out what you don't know and then being okay to go, oh, I don't know that. I don't have to do absolutely everything here. Who can I ask? And that evaluation piece, which is being able to evaluate what's someone's teaching you is bullshit or it's useful or, and that takes a while, right? And that's pulling from different resources, continuing to have ongoing learning conversations and not thinking that you know everything and that every conversation you're having, you're just imparting wisdom onto everybody else. It's actually stopping, listening. Jacqueline Nagel, who's my business mentor, she put a great quote up the other day, which I will butcher, but it was about the act of listening. So actually listening to people, not so then you can inject in the conversation or what are you going to say next about what they've just said, but just absorbing and taking that in. And I think I need to do that more. And I try and do that now, particularly on the podcast. So people have said, they want to hear from me. So I really want to have conversations with people rather than just, asking them questions. But that active listening piece is so important because we don't do that enough. Being an extrovert myself, it is difficult to have silence in conversations. But yeah. And so I think you're so right. Lifelong learning, active learning, maybe active learning. I don't know. I made that up. Active learning.
Yeah. Well, and not being discouraged and I think this is really key this is the iterative kind of tech process is that, you try it. It doesn't work. You get feedback. You try again. You iterate. You keep trying. You don't get discouraged because the first thing you tried didn't work.
Yes.
You look at the data. You look at the feedback. And I think it's such the same with learning, as particularly if it's been a long time since you've had to learn a new skill. Like for adults who are learning to code, I can't code, but I know enough about learning to know that when you are a total beginner, especially in a skill that requires a fair amount of fluency before you can kind of really enjoy it, those early stages of learning can be really hard and not very much fun, which can be really discouraging if you don't realize that that's the learning process. That's what happens, But if you understand that this is the process of learning, you don't get discouraged at that point, and you obviously seek feedback to make sure that you are on the right path, but you keep going, you keep practicing. You don't pick up a violin today and get really upset that in 3 days' time you still aren't playing Vivaldi. Like it takes time. Anything that is a really very technical skill is going to take some time and a lot of effort and practice to learn. But as long as you understand that, you will stick at it long enough to actually learn it.
Totally. And I found this a lot, moving into my own business. I expected to be amazing at everything because I don't know, I had these really high expectations of myself that I would never, and then when I stuffed it up at the start, you would get really just, of course, why would I? Of course I'm going to stuff this up because I don't know anything and who do I think I am trying to do this? So that self-talk can be, and I didn't realize it, you hear about these things, make sure you're positive, talk and all this kind of fluffy stuff. But it's so true because you're not going to get it right the first time. And if you do, high five to you, great job. But the next thing you might have to iterate, and you need to be adaptive and agile enough to know that, you can shift quite easily. And
that's the growth mindset.
Right now. So just say you do something and you get really negative feedback and you think, oh, no one's ever going to trust me again, or, even like something you did that wasn't that bad, but you thought you should have done it better kind of thing. Like, oh, people are going to think I'm stupid. Like, I can't believe I did that, blah, 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 blah. You remember that stuff way more than anyone else does.
Yeah.
And I think going, okay, cool. That was like admitting that you could have done that a bit better. And then actually doing the real work, which is the action part, not just talking about improving, but the action part, which is hard. Getting real feedback is hard.
Yeah.
Particularly if it's constant when you have a business coach. But so worth it. And once you move out of that failure is bad mindset and into, oh, great, I'm learning. This is cool. This is fun.
Yeah.
And you dip down and up and, it's a bit crazy at times. But yeah, I think that the learning part of that and knowing that you're not going to get it right the first time and not giving up on that and then continuing to go. But then the biggest thing is that evaluation piece that you talked about, which is being able to evaluate whether you keep going on that particular thing or you pivot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, don't keep flogging a dead horse.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, we've just going to have to come to the end of this episode, but we've got more questions. So we're going to have to do another Ask Zoe Anything feature one day soon. But the last two questions come from another former podcast guest, Daniel Fletcher. He was in episode 45. So go out and check that out if you haven't heard it or if it's been a while since you listened. And the first question Daniel has asked is, Zoe, if you were Prime Minister for a day, what would you stop, start and continue?
Funny story. I wanted to be the first female Prime Minister when I was at school.
Damn, you missed out.
Jay Gill got there before me.
Yeah.
But tough job, right?
Yeah, good on her.
So, yes. And I reconsidered my career in politics for the moment.
Yes, fair enough.
I'm going to do this briefly because, there's so many things.
Yes.
But stop doing things the way we've always done them and hopefully not get kicked out as soon as I get in the hot seat. I would start to embrace diversity, but real diversity and digital diversity. And I think age diversity, which may fit into digital diversity, but also doesn't necessarily have to be one and the same. So digital diversity, this really stuck with me. I spoke to Andrew Grill in episode
38. It was episode 38.
And so it really stuck with me because it's so important and it just captures everything that I want to see. So I want to see smart, and not smart as in, educated or whatever, but smart in this smart community sense of young people at the same table as the experienced politicians, leaders, and not just as a token, but actually really making a difference or being listened to, being heard, having a voice. It's actually really dangerous if we get left behind in this because we won't be able to deal with, in one sense, we won't be able to deal with these threats, these cyber threats that are going to happen if we don't have digital diversity at the table. And that's just one example, but it's dangerous also because when we're building or creating or nurturing our smart communities, we won't be able to do that in a real way. People won't feel empowered if it's just the same, they're just seeing the same people. And it's so important to have role models that look or that you feel attached to or that you feel this attraction to because you can see you in that. And that's, I guess from a community perspective, that's the diversity piece. So, engineers, it's not just female engineers, you've got different backgrounds, you've got different ages, people making a difference. So then young people and all people can feel empowered to go, oh, okay, well, if they can do it, I can do it. I found it difficult that I didn't have a role model per se when I was looking at being an engineer, but I just was a bit rebellious and wanted to do something a bit different. And all the other smart kids were doing engineering. But we want people to pick it not for that reason, because there may be far and few between, but actually going, oh, that sounds like a really great career. And, it is. You can do so many different things with it. But it shouldn't matter whether, what your background is or what gender you are or that kind of thing. So start really embracing that digital diversity.
Nice.
And then continue to make Australia a livable country for everyone, having these smart community conversations, because they are being had and they're starting to open up more and more, which I'm really excited about. And then what makes them real is opening up opportunities, the funding, being able to better ourselves and the community. So continue that forward. And I think the only way we do that is by stopping doing things the way we've always done them and by starting embracing that digital diversity. Because I think Australia is a great place to live, but we can always be better and more inclusive in our communities. And I think that we need to change the way we're doing things in order to continue to be a prosperous, wealthy, beautiful country.
Yeah. On that note, the second question that Daniel has asked is what region or community or city, he doesn't specify, but I think he means in Australia. So what region or community or city do you think, as a result of implementing smarter technologies, is making more informed decisions?
So I took this as, I'll talk about a couple in Australia that are doing things kind of just doing amazing things, kind of like under the radar, kind of, just doing stuff. So Moreton Bay Regional Council is one of those, and they've started doing lots of stuff in the space, and in a way that they're just kind of taking stock and gathering the data to make better decisions, and even gathering the data to work out whether the decisions they're making now are the right ones, which is awesome. Bendigo is another one doing amazing stuff down there, and Canterbury Bankstown as well. So Bendigo, I haven't had them on the podcast yet, but it'll come. And I had the mayor of Canterbury Bankstown on the podcast a while ago.
I think that was episode 68.
68, yeah. So I think in Australia, there are lots of councils and regions doing some amazing stuff, and some other stuff that I'm just about to start doing that can't really talk about at the moment, but looking forward to seeing that come to life. One of the cities we can really learn from is the city of Palo Alto. So we had Jonathan Reichenthal on the podcast, episode 77.
Mm-hmm.
And they have been doing a lot of smart city stuff since, probably earlier than this, but since, say, 2012. So lots of things happening there. And they have really been focusing on the smarter citizen. So through empowerment, through knowledge sharing, through having more tools, lower barriers to entry, and ultimately through facilitating that through government. So in Palo Alto, real-time data is available through various new sensor networks, and this will form the basis of their smart city solution. And it already has like open data portal. So this was designed by a local startup company, and that was launched. That was the 2012 that I got. So 2012. So people can search for and access any of the city's data and can also request new data sets that they would like to be made available. So the portal offers the data in different formats and visualizations, etc. So then local entrepreneurs or international entrepreneurs or local businesses can use that data to either create apps or make better decisions about the way they're doing business, where people, all those type of things. So it's accessible at a local level so people can use that data to make better decisions. And it also has changed the way that the city kind of works in itself and communicates. So both with the public, so it has increased the transparency of these operations. And then internally as well, because it allows that faster sharing of up-to-date and easy to visualize data sets across the different departments. The skill sets that are required, so then the open data strategy and portal can remain, safe and secure, and, they can make good decisions about that. And then creating that dashboard so then people can have access in real time. So I think Palo Alto, talking to Jonathan on the podcast, and then also they have a page on Be Smart Cities. So go and check that out because it explains what they've been up to, and we can really learn from that, I think. And I think it doesn't start with an app or a widget, but those things still form part of our smart communities if it is helping us identify or solve the pain points of our communities. So Palo Alto had a focus on that smarter citizen through empowerment, and then they use technology to enable that. So I think they're a really good example. And I'm hoping that I can get some real kind of deep examples from an Australian sense as well. And I think we are doing a lot, but we just need to share more, which is what we talked about earlier, which is having that kind of sharing platform so then we can know what other people are doing and who to speak to and what lessons they've learned and all that kind of thing.
I really like that. Thank you, Zoe. Well, I think we'll have to wrap up there, but we will definitely revisit this idea of putting you in the hot seat because people clearly want to hear from you and you have a lot to say, which is great. So stay tuned, listeners. We will have Zoe back in the interview seat sometime soon, but next week we'll be back to our regular scheduled programming. And thanks for staying with us for 100 episodes. We can't wait to see how things pan out over the next 100. And we're looking forward to sharing that journey with all of you.
Can I add?
Yeah.
I just want to say thanks again. I know we've banged on about this, but thanks to the smart community. So the people, my guests on the podcast, I've learnt so much and I hope everyone else has as well, because we've got some really amazing insights and people willing to share and collaborate and, build these connections. So I wouldn't be able to sit here in the hot seat without all of you. So thank you again, and send in those questions because it sounds like we're going to have to do this a few more times because we didn't even get through half the questions that we had. But yes, thanks again, and thanks for listening. And as always, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community or find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter @SmartComPod. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears, so thank you in advance. As always, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.